Cheryl Swopes she's lighting herself on fire, Steve. They had to pull her off a game because she can't be trusted to call Caitlin Clark games correctly or fairly. They basically pulled her off the game for racism. You're too much of a bigot to call Caitlin Clark games. We're pulling you off the game. What is this woman doing?
Every time Caitlin gets fouled, we can't make it seem like she was assaulted. Will Caitlin Clark come into the WNBA and do what she's doing right now? Immediately? Absolutely not.
Caitlin Clark can't seem to please everyone, and her biggest critic, Cheryl Swoops, has been making headlines for all the wrong reasons. Swoops has openly refused to give Clark the recognition she deserves, leading many to believe she's running the unofficial Caitlin Clark Haters Club. Fans and analysts alike have noticed her reluctance to acknowledge Clark's impact, even as the Indiana Fever have surged in recent weeks and positioned themselves as legitimate playoff contenders. Stephen A. Smith recently blasted Swoops for failing to mention Clark's name while praising the Fever's success, and despite the backlash, her stance hasn't shifted. The situation intensified when she defended Diamond DeShields after a controversial foul on Clark, which many saw as dirty. Instead of remaining neutral, Swoops publicly backed DeShields, fueling speculation that her dislike for Clark runs deeper than just basketball. What makes this even more striking is that Swoops, as one of the greatest players in basketball history, should know better than most how to recognize game-changing talent. A former MVP, champion, and WNBA legend, she clearly understands the sport at the highest level, so her refusal to give Clark credit feels intentional. In fact, her criticism of Clark dates back to her college days, when Clark was shattering records and becoming the all-time leading scorer in women's NCAA history. While most of the basketball world celebrated that milestone, Swoops wasn't exactly thrilled. On Gilbert Arenas' podcast, she made her feelings clear.
Just for Caitlin, but you asked me about Caitlin. If you're going to break a record, to me, if it's legitimate, you have to break that record in the same amount of time that player.
For starters, Cheryl Swoops wasn't being honest when she claimed her comments weren't directed at Caitlin Clark. Before Clark became the undisputed queen of college basketball scoring, Kelsey Plum held the record, and nobody, including Swoops, had anything negative to say about Plum's achievement. But the moment Clark broke the record, Swoops suddenly had something to say. Her criticism didn't even add up, considering Clark surpassed Plum in fewer games, despite both having played 139 in total. Instead of celebrating Clark's historic run, Swoops downplayed it, at one point even claiming Clark was taking 40 shots per game. The implication was clear: Clark only broke the record because she had a green light to shoot at will. In other words, Swoops suggested that any player could have done what Clark did if given the same freedom. But that narrative doesn't hold up, and it leaves fans wondering why Swoops seemed so bothered by Clark's success. Her commentary grew louder once Clark entered the WNBA. Early on, Swoops wasn't directly attacking her, but in recent weeks it's become obvious she's far from a fan. The tipping point came when Swoops praised the Indiana Fever's resurgence without mentioning Clark's name, even though Clark has been the driving force behind their run, playing at an MVP caliber level. That omission didn't sit well with Stephen A. Smith, who publicly called her out, arguing that as a legend of the game, Swoops should be the bigger person and acknowledge the rookie's impact. Recently, the WNBA announced that Caitlin Clark had been named Player of the Week, a well-deserved honor given how her stellar play has fueled the Indiana Fever's surge in the second half of the season. Cheryl Swoops, meanwhile, was on broadcasting duty during the Dallas Wings vs Las Vegas Aces matchup when the award winners were announced live. Her broadcast partner congratulated both honorees, Clark and Nafisa Collier. But Swoops? She stayed completely silent. No acknowledgement, no comment, nothing. That silence spoke volumes. It seemed obvious that she was trying to avoid giving Clark credit. And to make matters worse, her silence came across as awkward and unprofessional, because broadcasters almost always offer at least a simple, neutral congratulations in these moments. Swoops could have easily said something like, "Congrats to the winners, they've both been playing great basketball." Instead, she chose the silent treatment, a choice that only amplified the perception that her dislike for Clark runs deep. Fans didn't miss it. Social media quickly lit up, calling Swoops out for her refusal to acknowledge Clark's latest accolade. And really, She backed herself into a corner. If she congratulated Collier while ignoring Clark, she would have been dragged for obvious bias. But by saying nothing at all, she confirmed what many already believe, that she simply can't stand seeing Clark succeed. Things escalated further for Sheryl Swoopes during a recent matchup between the Fever and the Chicago Sky. Caitlin Clark was fouled hard by Diamond DeShields in a play that drew immediate controversy. Clark clearly had control of the ball, yet DeShields delivered a bump that had little to do with making a legitimate play. The officials saw it the same way, handing DeShields a flagrant 1 foul, which gave Clark 2 free throws and possession. To most who watched it live, the foul looked intentional, if not outright malicious. Instead of cooling the tension, Swoopes fanned the flames. She didn't mention Clark, but she quickly took to social media to back DeShields. "Head up, kid. Hate will not win. You are covered, and there is nothing these evil people can do about that. All love for you," Swoopes tweeted. On the surface, it looked like she was encouraging DeShields to brush off the backlash. But for many fans, the message carried a different implication. Swoopes was siding with the player who delivered a cheap shot on Clark. The reaction online was swift. One fan wrote, "So you're good with blatant cheap shots against players just because you don't like them? Got it." Another said, "Condoning flagrant fouls?" Now it's clear. The criticism reflected a growing frustration among Clark supporters, who see Swoopes' stance not just as bias, but as enabling dirty play. While there's always been a desire to see women's basketball played with the same toughness as the physical era of the 90s and 2000s, most agree there's no place for reckless fouls that cross the line. By standing with DeShields instead of taking a neutral stance, Swoopes only reinforced the perception that she's more interested in opposing Clark than protecting the integrity of the game. What makes Swoopes' comments even worse is the message they seem to send: keep doing what you're doing. As a legend of the game, she should know better than to condone flagrant fouls or reckless physical play. Instead, her words came across as fuel on the fire. The numbers tell the story. According to league data, 77% of flagrant fouls this season have been committed against Caitlin Clark. Even more staggering, 80% of those came from the Chicago Sky. That's not coincidence, it's animosity. And at the heart of it is Clark's ongoing rivalry with Angel Reese. The feud goes back to 2023, when Reese's LSU squad defeated Clark's Iowa team in the NCAA championship. Now in the WNBA, that rivalry has spilled over into the pros, with Sky players backing their rookie by fouling Clark hard whenever possible. By publicly supporting Diamond DeShields, Swoopes only added to the tension. She knows full well about the bad blood between the Fever and the Sky, yet her stance seemed like an open invitation for Chicago players to keep targeting Clark. Sure, drama can generate headlines and boost league attention, but this isn't just drama, it's dangerous. The WNBA's biggest young star and most marketable player is taking unnecessary hits, and the precedent Swoopes is helping set could put Clark's health and career at risk. At its worst, it's like telling Draymond Green to keep kicking players or choking them out, endorsing reckless play that has no place in the sport. For a Hall of Famer and broadcaster, that's not just irresponsible, it's reckless. When Draymond Green pulled his on-court antics in the NBA, analysts and fans alike called him out, telling him to knock it off. Nobody encouraged him to keep at it. That's what makes Swoopes' behavior so troubling. While no one has gone as far as choking Caitlin Clark on live television, Swoopes' defense of players committing hard fouls sends a dangerous message: it's okay to hurt someone just because you don't like them. As a broadcaster and analyst, her responsibility should be to elevate the WNBA's product, not drag it down by normalizing cheap shots against the league's brightest star. Instead, her apparent fixation on tearing Clark down has overshadowed her duty to the game. It's a classic case of hatred clouding judgment, with Swoopes forgetting the bigger picture, helping the WNBA grow through the excitement that Clark brings to the sport. Why Swoopes seems to hold such deep resentment is something only she can truly answer, but there are a few theories. Swoopes was one of the WNBA's trailblazers in the 1990s and early 2000s, winning championships, MVPs, and cementing herself as one of the greatest players in league history. Yet even at the height of her dominance, the WNBA struggled with viewership and relevance. She and her peers carried the league during its leanest years, when women's basketball was fighting for attention and financial stability. Now, along comes Caitlin Clark, instantly commanding the spotlight, breaking records, driving ratings, and drawing in new fans at a level the WNBA hasn't seen before. For veterans who endured the dark years, it can feel like a slap in the face to see so much attention suddenly flood the league because of one player. Add in the complicated layer of race, Clark being white in a league historically dominated by black stars, and the resentment becomes easier to understand. It isn't necessarily about overt racism, but about a refusal to accept that new fans may find the league more appealing with Clark as its centerpiece. The reality is that much of Clark's appeal comes from who she is as much as how she plays. America is a majority white country, and historically, the WNBA's black stars, no matter how talented, never fully captured that demographic. Clark, however, checks all the boxes. She's white, she plays with the same flair and deep shooting range as Steph Curry, one of the NBA's most marketable players, and she's charismatic and appealing off the court. Naturally, she's going to draw in fans who might not have paid attention before. That's not to say Clark doesn't deserve the attention, she absolutely does, but it helps explain why some veterans may feel frustrated. For decades, they worked tirelessly to make the league more popular, yet it took a white rookie to spark a surge in ratings and viewership. Stephen A. Smith and others have accepted this reality, with Stephen A. going so far as to say the best move is to ride the wave Clark has created instead of tearing her down, and here's where things get interesting. Maybe Sheryl Swoopes doesn't hate Clark in the traditional sense. Maybe she's playing a different game. Swoopes is in her 50s now, her playing days are long behind her, and she didn't earn the massive salaries today's athletes enjoy. As a broadcaster, she's also not raking in millions. So how does she stay relevant? By inserting herself into the Clark conversation. Attention drives everything in today's media cycle, and the quickest way to attract attention is by going against the grain. Being Clark's biggest fan won't make headlines, but refusing to acknowledge her will. Just look online, Clark's detractors often get more media coverage than her supporters. Angel Reese has leaned into this dynamic by becoming Clark's fiercest on-court rival. Swoopes, too, seems to be carving out her niche as Clark's foil, except her battleground is the broadcast booth and social media. She may no longer be able to challenge Clark on the court, but by downplaying her achievements and subtly fueling rivalries, Swoopes ensures she stays in the spotlight. In her mind, that may be just as valuable as competing for championships once was. When fans see a WNBA legend like Sheryl Swoopes refusing to give Caitlin Clark her props, it generates exactly the kind of attention Swoopes needs to boost her platform. By leaning into the role of Clark's biggest critic, she can attract more listeners to her podcast, grow her social media presence, and strengthen her personal brand. Negative publicity is still publicity, and if that's her goal, Swoopes may actually be playing a smart game. It's the same formula that Skip Bayless has perfected in sports media. Bayless is famous for being LeBron James' harshest critic, and whether you agree with him or not, his constant attacks have kept him relevant for decades. People tune in either to cheer him on or to see him get roasted, but either way, he wins. America thrives on drama, which is exactly why reality TV dominates the culture. Swoopes may have figured out the same thing. She doesn't need to praise Clark to stay relevant, she needs to oppose her. From a business standpoint, that might be the savviest move of Swoopes' post-playing career. By riding the wave Clark has created, she positions herself to profit from the league's surge in popularity, even without stepping on the court. The worst-case scenario, though, is that Swoopes really is just a hater who doesn't want Clark to succeed. And that's harder to reconcile, because Swoopes is widely respected as a trailblazer and one of the greatest players in women's basketball history. Pure spite doesn't fit the image of who she is. As for Clark, she seems to understand what comes with superstardom. Haters are part of the deal. The bigger question is what this means for the WNBA as a whole. Does the league benefit from the drama and rivalries, or does it risk losing credibility when its legends appear to condone targeting its brightest star? That tension may define the league's next chapter. Clark's PR team likely prepared her for this long before she entered the WNBA. They must have told her that haters would come, not always out of genuine dislike, but because attaching themselves to her name could help them siphon off a piece of her popularity. That's why Clark has stayed quiet. She's never clapped back at Sheryl Swoopes or fired shots at critics, because she understands this isn't personal, it's business. Every great athlete goes through it. Michael Jordan had his critics. LeBron James has been dissected and mocked for decades. Clark's treatment is simply the WNBA's version of that same cycle. And as the league grows, the criticism, rivalries, and hate will only grow louder, not because legends and analysts want to tear players down, but because controversy drives interest. Drama sells, and drama brings money. That's why the saga between Clark and Swoopes is far from over. It's unlikely Swoopes will ever give Clark the recognition she deserves, and that's fine. Their feud is already shaping up to be one of the longest-running storylines in WNBA history. In the end, it benefits everyone. Clark remains the face of the league, and Swoopes stays relevant in the media cycle. It's the same dynamic that's kept Skip Bayless in the spotlight for 2 decades by relentlessly criticizing LeBron James. Bayless' constant hate hurt his reputation in some circles, but it made him a household name and a very wealthy man. If Swoopes continues down this road, she risks becoming the Skip Bayless of women's basketball. That may not sound flattering, but from a business perspective, it could be the smartest move she's ever made.